everyone. Thank you all so much for being here to this month's Earth Talks. My name is Tanya. As mentioned, I work for the Biosphere Institute, and we host these every month here in partnership with the Canmore Public Library. I also want to recognize April, who's been helping us month after month, and this is actually her last month before moving on to new teachers. So thanks, April. So today we'll be chatting about how climate and environmental issues are deeply intertwined with justice. Climate change and environmental harm disproportionately affect marginalized communities who often have contributed the least to climate change itself. So true climate action requires centering their voices and committing to a just transition that uplifts and centers those who've been impacted by various intersecting systems of oppression. So I just want to begin by acknowledging that we are gathering here in Chowchukchin Pudebi, which in Stoney Nakoda translates as shooting at the willows. This is the traditional Treaty 7 territory of the Stoney or Iyake Nakoda, comprised of the Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Big Stoney nations, Tsuut'ina First Nation, as well as the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai. This land is also home to the Rocky View Métis District 4 within the Battle River Territory. So as we learn today and discuss environmental justice, we're really excited to share that after Adam's presentation, we have a little bit of a panel discussion with Mayor Krausert, as well as Javan Mukhtarov. And so unfortunately they're ill today, which is why they're joining us on Zoom, but we're really still pleased that they're able to make it on Zoom. So without further ado, I'm very pleased and privileged to announce and introduce Adam Linnard, who is a conservation professional with backgrounds in community development in the Global South and environmental justice in North America. He was born and raised in Canmore and now lives in Exshaw with his partner and their 4 young kids. Please welcome Adam.
All right, thank you everybody for coming. Thanks Tanya for organizing, the Biosphere Institute as a whole for doing these Earth Talks. And of course the Canmore Library too for hosting them. I forgot that I gave you all that. That was like my whole first section. Yeah, I'm Adam Linnard. I was born here. I'm a Canmore kid. My parents are here tonight. My dad's working class Toronto kid. My mom's a Saskatchewan Mennonite farm kid. They met in Banff as seasonal workers and moved to Canmore because it was cheap. So yeah, my background, my relevant backgrounds include an international development degree from Dalhousie in Halifax, about 8 years in international development, poverty relief programming in the Global South, and an environmental studies degree from York University in Toronto with a focus in parks, wilderness, and environmental justice. I've been in the conservation as a conservation professional for about 10 years now. But I want to be clear, I am not here in any official capacity. I'm just here as me. And I want to state this sort of up front. I don't always live up to this, but what is common across my experiences is that I care a lot about what is right and wrong. I care a lot about fairness and justice. And I reject a politics that tells me I have to choose whether that applies to people or grizzly bears. Sometimes it starts that simple. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about environmental justice as a concept, as a movement, a little bit of history about that movement, and then we're going to bring it back to the Bow Valley, and we're primarily going to talk about affordability and housing developments. And briefly, I'm also going to talk about highway crossings and resource extraction as other sort of spheres in the Bow Valley where environmental justice comes into play. And then we'll have a conversation. Hopefully we'll have a decent amount of time for that conversation. I put my email at the beginning. I'll put it up at the end again if folks want to have further conversations in the future. One of the key assertions of environmental justice is that the people who are most impacted by environmental conditions are also most capable of understanding and assessing those conditions and finding solutions to them. So I really want to have conversation with our community about this. So the environmental justice movement and concepts are the product of this convergence of the civil rights movement in the US and the environmental movements from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And this recognition in the pursuit of equality for Black Americans, that a lot of their obstacles to that equality were actually experienced through environmental conditions, primarily exposure to environmental toxins and pollutants. There's a clear articulation and emergence of that movement in the 80s, largely through really big studies that identified, or they were studying where toxic locations are throughout the United States, everywhere in the country. And the findings of those studies were that the best predictor of where a toxic site would be in the United States was how close it was to communities of Black, Latino, and Indigenous people. It wasn't income, it wasn't education, it was race. Through the 90s and 2000s, we got a lot of legislative adoption in the US. Get an Environmental Justice Act in 1994, requires environmental policy in the United States to be collaboratively developed to some extent with people who are most impacted by it. There's a lot of programming to reclaim lands or to reclaim toxic sites to reduce that unequal exposure to environmental harms that is experienced by people of color. Throughout that time, there's sort of sporadic application in Canada. There's some Black-led movements in Ontario and Nova Scotia specifically. But the concept of environmental justice is also sort of in the literature often applied to land-based Indigenous movements, even if Indigenous people don't use that framework themselves. That's more often to be presented as sovereignty, treaty rights, constitutional rights, now land back. Today, now, as of last summer, Canada introduced its first Environmental Racism Act of 2024. It's an act to create a plan, so it's largely symbolic. You don't actually need a law to make a plan, in case that wasn't clear. But it does formally acknowledge that environmental racism is a real thing in this country. At this, and just last month, Aamjiwnaang First Nation outside Sarnia, Ontario, was the first to sign an agreement with Environment and Climate Change Canada to collaborate on assessing their environmental exposure to petrochemical toxins in Chemical Alley. Now, this probably flies a little under the radar given everything else going on in the States, but all of that environmental justice and environmental racism legislation has been undermined. It's been dismantled through executive order for the time being. So people in the States are definitely still working on environmental justice, but the federal government has nothing to do with it, for the time being at least. So some of the takeaways from that, or the trends that I want to highlight from that history, environmental justice is basically three things all at once, and they are not always compatible, and sometimes they actually are in conflict. It is a social movement. It's a very specific social movement originating in Black struggles for equality that has been applied to and been utilized by movements for community improvement around the world, including here in Canada. It's also a legal or legislative field that pursues pretty precise technical criteria and standardization for assessing environmental conditions, why they are the way that they are, and figuring out paths for redress. And then it is an academic or cognitive framework, a way of looking at the world for studying, analyzing, and understanding unequal outcomes in environmental conditions. That's largely where I'm standing at with you. Environmental justice is seldom applied to a community like ours, and I think it should be. I think the biggest reason it's not is because we have a reputation externally, and I think we have an understanding often of our own community as being homogeneously white, of being homogeneously affluent, and of being green. And those are kind of not what is considered in the sphere of environmental justice typically. I think our experience, though, and we'll look at this a little bit more in depth, is that environmental conditions here and the exposure to environmental harms here is not actually atypical. And in fact, the Bow Valley, of course, is not just wealthy, but extremely stratified economically. And that economic stratification is highly raced. And beyond that, conservation and environmentalism have played a key role in colonizing this landscape. Our national parks and our forest reserves, among other rationales, were created to protect timber and water resources for the prairie, for the specific purpose of white settlement. And that process of protecting these resources included the forced removal and exclusion of Indigenous people from their lands and their confinement onto reserves. In a really big way, then, the conditions of inequality are produced in the name of environmentalism and conservation in this landscape. Language matters. If you know me, you know that I think that language matters. So environmental justice is a specific movement. It has specific history that should be acknowledged and respected. I've already said environmental justice. I've already said environmental racism. There are adjacent movements like food justice and climate justice. There's also growing sort of people increasingly claiming the phrase intersectional environmentalist to recognize the various forms of social oppression that are experienced through environmental conditions. Each of those has its own focuses. They have their own sort of suite of actors. They have their own histories. We should acknowledge those. I also don't care right now. The language doesn't matter right now. What matters is the commonality among these labels, among these movements. And what those are is found in these two big understandings and one seemingly simple question that, of course, is not at all simple. So these understandings include that social inequality, so racism, income inequality, ableism, colonialism, citizenship status, both exacerbates and is exacerbated by the disproportionate exposure to environmental harms. For example, cancer-causing pollution, and barriers to environmental assets, like our green spaces and parks. The second understanding is that environmental sustainability cannot be achieved through social injustice, and social equity cannot be achieved in a degraded environment. They're mutual projects. They must be pursued together, or we will achieve neither. The question then is, what do we do about it? I think housing and affordability is a really good example of this because it's been with us for a very long time. We understand it, I think experientially and intuitively to be both a big environmental problem and a big social problem. But because we understand those two things, it is very easy to see this problem as one of the needs of people versus the needs of wildlife. Environmental justice and related fields give us tools for rejecting that conflict position and finding solutions for people and nature together. Before I dig into these numbers that mean nothing without context, I want to recognize that our communities in the Bow Valley are very different. They're extremely interconnected and we have to recognize them as interconnected, but they do have differences that need to be understood when we talk about their approaches to these questions. So Banff, for example, of course, has the fixed 4 square kilometer development area. They are the most constrained for space in the valley. They have a need to reside clause that mostly reserves housing for labor to varying effect. Parks Canada has ultimate development authority in Banff, not the town of Banff. And Canmore, for decades, was Banff's safety valve on housing. That's how we got here. That's how a lot of folks got here. Canmore is not a mature tourism economy like Banff. Canmore is a real estate economy. Tourism in Canmore flows through housing, which means that our housing market is a global tourism and lifestyle market. It's not associated with labor and wages. It also doesn't pay commercial tax revenue. The MD of Bighorn for the last 10 years or more has been Canmore's safety valve on housing. The MD of Bighorn is mostly Crown land. They have small pockets of developable land for housing, but not a lot, and prices have skyrocketed there as well. Our population centers in the MD now and in projections for the future are not big enough for a lot of our interconnected services like regional transit or a future passenger train, right? We're not going to access those kinds of services unless something changes. So the affordability context in the Bow Valley, let's talk about these numbers. And I'm sure some of these will be not unfamiliar to you. The 2023 indicator living wage for Canmore was $38.80 an hour. It's roughly $75,000 a year. Canmore is the most expensive place to live in Alberta. That $38 is $14 an hour more than Jasper, which was second place. It's not close. In 2024, the average price for a detached home in Canmore is $1.7 million. That's second to Whistler in the country. You can ski out of your kitchen in Whistler. The average condo price was $765,000. That's the highest in the country. When interest rates spiked, costs in those mountain communities across the country went down. They didn't in Canmore. They increased by 10% in 2023. That's because 40% of our housing market was recreational. And recreational buyers didn't need a mortgage by and large. They could buy that $1.7 million house with cash. The current housing gap in Canmore is about 600. That's the lowest estimate that I've heard. That's expected to be 2,500 by 2030, according to Canmore Community Housing. That's the town of Banff's estimate is 700 to 1,000 units of shortfall right now. As of 2024, there were 716 official tourist homes in Canmore. Hundreds more are planned in coming years in approved development plans. You might notice here that the increase in housing development coincides with an increase in the shortfall of housing. The more houses we are building, the farther behind we are falling. And we're going to talk about that more. The Gini coefficient measures income inequality. It's based on census data, which means it doesn't actually include the most vulnerable and lowest paid workers. Still, in 2022, for the second consecutive census, Canmore was the most unequal community in the country in terms of wealth distribution. 28% of our households in the valley have income below $60,000 a year, when the living wage is $75,000. And that $60,000 is income, it's not wages. Look at a job board, any job board, and good luck finding a job that's paying $38.80 an hour. I looked at the Job Resource Center 2 days ago. There was 125 job postings. 6 of them paid a living wage. Some of them might if you have enough experience. So what does that mean practically? It means, for example, a lot of us are renting. We have 37% of our households rent compared to 27% in the province. That means we can't afford to buy homes where we live. 32% of Canmore households have kids compared to 41% in the province. Our young families can't stay. More significantly, it means food insecurity, it means hunger, it means people choosing between food and rent, and they have to choose rent. These are a key driver in what the Banff Canmore Foundation recently described as a crisis in mental health and well-being in the Vital Signs report. That's suicides and addictions. One of the notes in that was that lower income youth are 3 to 4 times more likely to report poor mental health than their affluent peers. And all of that is housing precarity and homelessness as well. It means, well, we have inadequate shelter space. We have people living in vehicles, willingly or not, and we're outsourcing the homelessness that we are creating in this condition to other communities by telling people if you can't afford to live here, you can leave. They do. Now that discrepancy between what we can expect to be paid here and what we can expect to spend here has to be made up somehow, or else none of us would live here. And that's primarily through passive income. That's investment income. It's intergenerational wealth, so inheritance and gifts from your parents. Thanks, mom and dad. And it's benefit payments that are often tied to past earnings. All of those require a level of capital that's disproportionately available to white people coming from somewhere else. And almost by definition is unavailable to the labor that we rely on. We have, as of last summer, some 700 temporary foreign worker permits in the Bow Valley held by employers here. There's another 1,500 in Jasper before the fire. For context there's about 700 ACMG certified mountain guides in all of Canada. Whatever our reputation is, our economy is enormously dependent on exploitable racialized labor with no realistic path to staying here and no realistic path to enjoying the environmental assets we're all so proud of. That's environmental racism. That's injustice. It is not like no one's doing anything. I want to be clear about that. But this conversation feels different than it did even a few years ago. And part of the reason is because this has been a crisis in the Bow Valley for a very long time. And now it is a crisis provincially, it is a crisis nationally, it is a crisis internationally. And that means we have a lot more people telling us what we should do about it. And this is wild. There's a common solution across politics. This is maybe the only thing that is agreed upon across politics right now. We need to make it easier to build more houses faster. So why don't we just do that here? Let's talk about our environmental context. Obviously, we are surrounded by very steep rocks. There's a physical limit to what we can do there. We are either within, like Banff, or we are right beside big protected areas or reserve lands. We have no space to grow in Banff, and we have very little to grow in Canmore or the MD of Bighorn. And yet we live in one of the most important valleys for wildlife in the continent, if not the world. Putting those together, our environmental justice context is that housing in the Bow Valley is a place-bound product with mobile global demand, especially in Canmore. Rather than housing labor, market housing, especially when it's 40% recreational, creates the need for additional labor. And that creates the need for additional housing. It's a cycle. We don't have very much space to build, and filling the space that we have with anything close to market housing will be an ecological disaster, and it will make our affordability crisis worse. Now we are doing things. Folks are doing things. Some of the solutions that are active in the valley include density bonusing, densification bylaws, and high density development and redevelopment plans. We have the levy on second homes in Canmore, and we have these below market housing providers in the YWCA, Canmore Community Housing, Bow Valley Regional Housing. The YWCA has a shelter. We have a shelter provider in Canmore with ambitions without resources in the Homelessness Society of the Bow Valley. These are all good things. They should be supported. They are also not likely to be enough. And for a picture of why that is, I just want to zoom in on bonusing, because that is our most available solution. The Three Sisters area structure plans say that 10% of residential units there will be below market purchase or rental units. And that commitment is unenforceable. There is no mechanism for the town to require that. They can only incentivize it through bonusing. That's under provincial legislation. Bonusing looks a little bit like this. So the developer will get one bonus market unit for 4 affordable units up until they reach that 10% threshold. Once 10% is reached, the bonusing becomes 1-to-1. There will be an equal number. If you build one affordable unit, you get, yay, a nice market unit you get to sell at normal cost. Those below market units have to be sold to an affordable housing operator within 1 year, or else they revert to the open market. None of that is social housing. It's below market. It is not poverty wages. It is not fixed to the wages we actually get in this community. And the market, as we've discussed, isn't remotely close to affordable for most of us. Quick math, if 10% of TSMB's approximately 5,000 new units are affordable, 500 units of below market but still very expensive housing in a valley that expects by 2030 to have a shortfall closer to 3,000. It's getting worse. And I want to stress this, our municipal governments are extremely limited by provincial legislation in what they can enforce and what rules they can create to incentivize affordability. But they are spending a ton of political capital to make those rules reality. Every time we complain about a second home levy, that takes away resources from our municipalities to pursue legislative change that might make a bigger difference. That's not to let them off the hook, by the way. So what are some of the things we could be doing more of? At the federal level, I mean, leaving aside more complicated stuff, Environment and Climate Change Canada will be having consultations on their national strategy for environmental racism. I would encourage people to participate in that, especially if you are impacted by it. If you want to be involved in that consultation process and don't know how, get in touch with me and we'll figure it out. At the provincial level, this is where the majority of the influence lies for Canmore. What I would like to see is greater control for the municipality in over housing and development decisions. The big one there is the Municipal Government Act in the province. That doesn't allow municipalities to require a development to be affordable in order to get approval. It also doesn't allow municipalities to make a development decision based on the well-being of wildlife. That's a provincial jurisdiction and the province claims it. Things like the All-Season Resorts Act and provincial land dispositions, which have been much more long-standing. That's where we get this Rundle View Spa proposal from, is the provincial land dispositions. Those kind of decisions are made at a provincial level, but they direct and coerce the municipalities what direction their development is going to happen. Our experience has not been that the province is going to make decisions for the affordability of this community. It will be for high profit margin tourism development. Our municipalities have pursued for a long time resort municipality designation. There is no such thing in Alberta, which is why it's taking so long. The idea is that the town of Canmore or any town has a tax base based on their population level. That's where you get your revenue from. But we're servicing the needs of hundreds of thousands of people on a tax base of 12 to 14,000. So you could get more money to provide more services for the people you're serving. You could also create a resort municipality designation, since we have to create it anyway, that would actually enable a community to implement a need to reside clause if that's the direction they wanted to take. I would also like to see the province stop obstructing federal granting programs to Alberta municipalities and get out of municipal politics. Whatever you think about the direction of the provincial government and their policy, they are hoarding power from municipalities in the name of hoarding it from the federal government. On the municipal level, I want to see more regional coordination between our municipalities. I am seeing more of it. It's better than it's ever been, I think. It's better than it's been in my adult life. But we do need to collaborate on an affordable housing strategy across our communities. And we need to complete an integrated public transit network that actually serves all of us, because right now it doesn't. Individually, and this is going to get nebulous and fuzzy, recognize your privilege and give some of it up. The Canadian Environmental Protection Act was amended in 2023 to recognize that every individual in Canada has a right to a healthy environment. That's a recognized human right in Canada now. When private property rights are in conflict with those rights, when they are in conflict with Indigenous rights and the prospect of the rights of nature, we have to be willing to reconsider the limits of private property rights. They cannot be sacred. When our fundamental relationship with land is the expectation that it will accrue capital value, we have no foundation for sustainability. We have no foundation for reconciliation or decolonization, and we have no foundation for demanding that another landowner like Three Sisters or Silvertip or Spring Creek act differently. This one's practical, and this was from Javan. If you have space, share it. People need housing in this community today. And yet 25% of our housing units are empty at any given moment. And finally, tell a different story about who belongs here and what it takes to qualify. There's great local initiatives like Darken the Mountains. There's broader ones like Color the Trails. Support those initiatives. We are hindered in our solutions by the very idea that the people that we see living here deserve to live here, and the people that we don't. So together, I believe that an environmental justice perspective on housing affordability in the Bow Valley demands that we commit our entire housing development agenda to below market, social, and shelter housing, because those are needs. That's what human beings actually need in our communities. And it's what grizzly bears, wolves, and elk need from us as well, so that we don't take up all the space they need. So I want to highlight just a couple other examples in less detail than that of issues that we maybe less frequently understand here to be both social and environmental. My aim here is just really to illustrate how this environmental justice perspective, or whatever label we want to put on it, helps us look at longstanding problems a little bit differently. I'm going to start with highway crossing. We are fantastic at wildlife crossings, like the best in the world at wildlife crossings. The network in Banff is the most studied, best understood, most replicated network on the planet. People come here from everywhere. And now we're finally seeing it in Alberta. I worked on that campaign for the Bow Valley Gap wildlife overpass. And when it was in its early days, representatives from the Stoney Nations were talking about how great it would be to have one out by the casino. It's a great place for a wildlife overpass. The concern that everyone had was, well, people are going to use it. There's houses on both sides of the road. It's not a lot of transit options. There's a highway running right down the middle of a community. People are going to use it. What we know from grizzly bear research and carnivore research in this landscape is if people use it, those animals are less likely to. They're going to use it less, and it's going to be less effective. So it kind of disappeared. To be fair, there are a lot of other complications to building one there. A few years down the road, I was working with Jarrett Two Young Man, who's the founder of the Nakota AV Club, on a video supporting that project before it was announced by the province. And this is what he said to me. And I have a hard time reading this. He said, when we first started learning about this, the youth said that they felt for the animals because they've lost people they loved on that highway too. So they could see right away how unfair it was when a highway was built through your home and you didn't have a say in it. Usually I put that on screen so I don't have to read it. The Palliser affordable housing development is growing. It's always growing. We still don't have a pedestrian crossing over there. I know it's in the plans. I know there's been staffing hired to design it and put it into plans, but we still don't have it. And any month now, we're getting exclusionary wildlife fencing on that road. Connectivity across highways is a huge wildlife conservation concern around the world. It is also a very human problem, like these others, that disproportionately impacts marginalized people. There's these great proposed and realized solutions to similar problems. Land bridges, sounds just like a wildlife overpass. This picture here is the community of Rondo in St. Paul, Minnesota. Once upon a time, 80% of St. Paul's African-American population lived in Rondo. In the 50s and 60s, interstates blew up all over the United States. They were built all over the place in order to facilitate white flight to the suburbs, in large part. A lot of those interstates got built through Black communities. Rondo lost over 700 homes and 300 businesses to this interstate. It lost the connectivity of its community, the same way that we talk about animals losing theirs over the highway. We talk about animals needing connectivity for to mate, to find food, and to find water. If your services are on one side of the road and you can't cross it, it's the same problem for people. There's been this, okay, and I want to emphasize this point too. One very related aspect of that is that building that interstate through that Black community plummeted property values in a Black community and made property values much higher in the white suburbs adjacent to it. That's the kind of wealth discrepancy that is felt intergenerationally. Recently, there have been these efforts to build a land bridge over that interstate. It would reclaim more land for housing and green space, and it would reestablish that continuous community. They have $6.2 million in state funding, and they have $2.2 million from a federal infrastructure bill for planning that land bridge. And incidentally, that's the same infrastructure bill that finances wildlife overpasses and underpasses in the Mountain West. Now this one's real, which is cool, because last time I looked it up, it wasn't yet. This is the Memorial Park land bridge in Houston. It was finished in 2023. The Memorial Park was one of the largest urban green spaces in the US and was divided in half by a highway in a similar period in 1955. And this land bridge has restored green space connectivity for people and wildlife. It's a large enough urban green space for wildlife, not carnivores necessarily, but wildlife. And it brought back 45 acres of native coastal prairie, which is one of the most endangered ecosystems in North America. It's down to about 1% of its historical coverage. My argument here isn't necessarily that we have to duplicate this in Canmore or in Minitni, but that when we employ our empathy for wildlife to build and to finance this vital infrastructure for them, that we do the same for people. The actions that calls for are not that exciting sometimes. That might be research. We don't actually know how big one of these might have to be to work for bears and people. We don't know exactly where it would have to be to meet those functions. Those are researchable agendas, but we need ambition and we need coordination between sectors that don't always work together. The conservation sector, the environmental sector, and the social sector. And of course, in Canmore, we do need that Palliser crossing to be a priority for the town. If anyone has expertise to apply to a solution like this, I would love to talk about it with you. Now, resource extraction is at the heart of environmental justice historically. One place that I love to start with this is that the Banff National Park boundary used to go to the Kananaskis River, right up to the Minitni Reserve, on the other side of Exshaw. The reason that it got pulled back was because industrial extraction and processing was not considered any longer to be consistent with the idea of wilderness that we wanted to project for our community. And so the boundary got moved, the industries which were already there in the park grew larger. And yet we consistently sort of describe and think of our valley as a wilderness space. The Exshaw Lafarge plant until just recently, and I'm not sure why it's not anymore, but was described on their own website as the largest cement plant in North America. Who benefits from that and who suffers from it? We know that the Stoney Nakoda First Nations have raised the issue of air pollution on the Minitni Reserve from this and the adjacent plants for years, many, many years. We know that the Exshaw School at the bottom here, right there, shares a chain link fence with that plant. And that school is almost entirely students from Minitni. There's 4 kids who aren't from K to 8. Sometimes the snow there is black. I asked Bryn's my son here. I asked Bryn, cheers. I asked him the other day if they ever stayed inside for recess because of it. He said, no, maybe they should though, because sometimes the kids eat snow. I don't think that would fly in Canmore with affluent white kids. We can push Alberta Environment and Protected Areas to revoke Lafarge's permit to burn coal, which they still have on an emergency basis. Lafarge can give that up willingly. The Bow Valley Clean Air Society has been part of efforts to do that. That school needs air monitors. They don't know the air quality inside the building. The school district should hear from all of us about that. We don't have accurate, decipherable reporting on air and water quality in adjacent communities. We don't know how it compares to World Health Organization guidelines because they won't tell us. Lafarge and Alberta Environment and Protected Areas should be hearing about that as well. I think it's easy to understand resource extraction as an environmental problem, and often, obviously, as a climate problem. At another point, I heard that Lafarge by itself emits more greenhouse gas, or 10 times the greenhouse gas of Canmore as a whole. The environmental harms, though, that those industries produce are not felt equally, even here in the Bow Valley. Just like everywhere else, they're felt along lines of class, race, and indigeneity. So despite our reputation as a region of homogeneous affluence and green lifestyles, active living, the Bow Valley is still full of examples in which the burden of environmental harms fall disproportionately on those who already have to deal with the burden of economic and social marginalization, as well as examples of the benefits of our environmental stewardship. Our parks, our wilderness access, our tourism dollars disproportionately benefiting the wealthy white people, who, by the way, are more likely to be benefiting from those environmental harms as well. Among other things, environmental justice or intersectional environmentalism helps combine our analyses of social and environmental conditions so we are better able to understand and improve them. And to get out of this false and really hopeless debate between caring for nature and caring for human beings, between caring for wild animals and caring for structurally oppressed people. I don't want to have that conversation ever again. I've described a few avenues for action here. I have some links if people care to see those, but I also believe in movement building. And I believe our best and most successful solutions will be found in working together across differences, across jurisdictions, with empathy and with a commitment to advancing environmental justice. So thank you very much for your time and attention. It really is golden. And I look forward to further conversations.
I'm gonna make a couple comments and then tell you what comes next. So first of all, the comments are, and I'll send over by the speaker so that because we have two panelists from whom we'd like to, I want to thank you very much for a highly insightful, highly novel, a really important topic. That was very thought-provoking and very fearless. And listen, I've lived here for 36 years. Some of you have lived here for longer than that. And there was a lot of new stuff and a lot of new connections happening in my brain. So, and again, big thanks to Adam for that. Okay, so here we go with a panel with two panelists who are unfortunately not feeling their best, but bless their socks, they made it to the meeting, and so I'm gonna invite both our mayor and Javan to briefly introduce themselves and then take 5 minutes giving their perspective on these important topics that Adam has raised. Then I'm just gonna, in fairness to Adam, if he can, I'm just gonna ask him to constrain his response to their responses in just a minute or two, if that's possible. Because this is not trivial stuff, and these are big, really important questions. And then we'll throw the floor open, your chance to ask questions of any one or all of the panelists. That sound good? Cool. And then so that I'll be able to go home, we'll vacate these premises just before 8:30. If we can swing it. So Mayor Krausert, I'll invite you to respond to what you just heard. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Just want to make sure that everybody can hear me all right.
Yeah,
okay, I've got a thumbs up there. First of all, thank you for the flexibility of being able to zoom in. I have been under the weather for the last few days, and so it really helps, and I very much appreciate being a part of this. So thanks to the Biosphere and to the library for this opportunity. And thanks to Adam. I thoroughly enjoyed that presentation. And to be honest with you, there was very little of what Adam said that I could disagree with. I wholeheartedly support a vast amount of what Adam was talking about and what Adam would be advocating for. In my seat, there are certain realities that I need to deal with, and Adam captured them very well, and I appreciate that. In fact, Adam, an election is coming in October, and I don't know if anybody wants to vote Adam for council, but maybe encourage him after oh, wait a minute, you're in Exshaw. Maybe you can
I
run
can't
in
live here.
you can run in the MD. So, the sorts of things that come up as I listen to Adam, and I don't have any prepared remarks. I was just making notes here as I was listening. Is he very accurately captured the housing crisis that we're in. It was an excellent summary. I totally agree that we should never be having the conversation about pursuing social equity or environmental protection. They both have to work together. The livability tax program that is gaining a lot of attention and opposition from those who it affects is a bold move by this council as a result of the fact that we do not have any other tools. We do not have any other resources that we can apply to get the housing that we need. One of the things that this council has done compared to previous councils is that we haven't relied on developers as we start to deal with how we're going to address our housing crisis. If you rely on developers, you get further and further behind, as Adam described, because you get little bits over a long period of time that fall behind the rate that you need. When first elected as mayor, I actually went around to the developers and I asked, how do we get on top of this? What would you recommend? And they recommended making the best use of what you have yourself. And so that's what we've done, actually. The first thing that this council did was move ahead with the Palliser Trail ASP. We brought it years ahead and we resourced it. And that's going to provide 1,300 units of housing, of which a minimum 1,000 will be non-market. But that only gets us part of the way. We have a few other pieces of land that we can use. And then there will also be some things coming in from the town and some things from the private sector, such as the school as a project that has 33% of its units non-market. We've got an apartment building that we've just provided some incentives to, so that it will be rented out only to residents. We're working to get housing built in the Palliser area. That takes funding, though, a lot of funding, and much more than a municipality of less than 20,000 can afford. And so we need to do something bold. We've been trying for years to get a resort municipality status, but it has been a no-go in Alberta. We don't have tools like inclusionary zoning that would require a certain amount of housing to be affordable or entry level. And so in taking this on ourselves, we have made the very difficult decision to put a much higher tax on those whose homes are not used to house anybody. And in doing so, we're also trying to be reasonable. We're taxing them at about the same level as a tourist home or a commercial business. So that's one thing that we're working on. And then there's a number of other things. We're working on a transportation mode shift to increase biking, walking, transit opportunities. And included within that will be a Palliser pedestrian. I want to see it as an underpass. Right now, we have a very small population, but we need to get it there as aligned with as that population increases. And we're looking by this time next year, we'll have about 500 units of below market rental housing in construction in Palliser. And so we need to get moving on that. We're also, our three prongs are livability, environment and climate, and relationships. And we've also done a lot in building relationships, particularly with our closest Indigenous neighbors, the Yarte Nakota. And just as recently as Friday, I was talking with two of the First Nations, and we are talking about entering into an agreement, a memorandum of understanding of how our communities can work closely together to meet better meet the needs of our neighbors, and out of respect and out of respect for the traditional lands on which we all work, live, and play. So I think I've taken up more than my 5. So I'll just leave it right there. There's so much more I could say in response to what Adam said, but I'll leave that hopefully for some of the questions.
President, thanks so very much. Turn it over to you, Javan, and just please introduce yourself and a little bit about your background for folks' context, and you have the floor, sir.
Hi everyone, my name is Javan. My pronouns are he, him. I am a first generation immigrant from Azerbaijan. I've lived in the Valley for over 10 years, just over 10 years. And I've been working with, I've worked with different immigration programs in the Valley, including settlement services and TFW program through CCIS. And I live in Canmore. Thank you for the invitation to be part of this wonderful and educational opportunity. Adam, hats off to you. That was a fantastic presentation. You touched on a lot of existing challenges that we have at the moment, and I think they all deserve attention and time to discuss and hopefully find some solutions as we come together as a community. And thanks to Mayor Sean for the information about housing and all the wonderful work they're doing around affordability. I think environmental justice, when I think about it, refers to the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of their race and background. And every time I think about involvement of immigrants in community initiatives, or just in general, the issues that involves everyone, including immigrants, is that the data comes to my mind is that 2021 census Canada had data about Canmore. At the time, the population of Canmore was about 15,000 people, just over 15,000 people, and 20% of that population is made by immigrants. And that says a lot how much immigrants needs to be involved in the issues that we have, from anything affordability to environmental, and that advocacy that needs to be there in every decision-making processes. So I'm grateful that I have this opportunity to be here. I'm not speaking on behalf of the immigrants, but I am hopefully will be contributing to some of the issues that I've seen arise and are there in the communities among immigrants. And yeah, so thank you.
So Adam said no to the response, which is legit, and gives you more time to ask your question. And so here's how we'll roll here. And I happen to know Adam's mom and dad, and you raised a good kid. Oh my God. Thanks, Lynn. If you have a question, so I'm going to just ask in the interest of time, no speechifying, please. If you have a question, figure out what that question sounds like in your sentence, and then also say who the question is for, and you're allowed to pose it to all three, or you can just single out one of our panelists, and I'll throw the floor open. Please, and state your name if you don't mind. That's okay.
Hi, Mahoney. I live in Banff. Sorry, I'm not better. I was just wondering, Adam, what do you think the pros and cons are for these revised?
And just, I'll invite you to paraphrase the question, Adam, or I'll do it if it's for one of the panelists, just so that everyone hears.
No, she nailed that. One sentence criteria. What are the pros and cons to the need to reside clause in Banff? I mean, having grown up in Canmore, I mean, the clear downside was that when people couldn't buy their place in Banff, they just built it here. That makes it sound like it's a bad thing for people to live here, but like that stratification moved down valley. That would be the risk in just Canmore implementing the same thing, right? Would be, okay, then what happens to the folks who still want to invest, still want their holiday home? That ends up in Dead Man's Flats, right? That ends up in Harvey Heights, which are already facing their own pressures. That's why this collaborative approach needs to be our baseline. We can't treat each community as in isolation, having to deal with this problem themselves. We have to recognize that it's all interconnected. I know that the need to reside, like, it gets trickier in a context of remote work and would need to be drafted in that reality, and the current one is not, like the one in Banff isn't. So I think it would be a very difficult thing to do right. But I think it would be worth exploring and trying to figure out what the impacts of it all would be and how to mitigate the good and mitigate the bad and highlight the good.
Question has to do with potable water in the evening. Context, I was present at a cultural learning circle at our place just before the pandemic. At the presentation, there were several Indigenous men, our neighbors, who very humbly said that they've been on a boil water alert for years. And how can we help remedy that? So that's absolutely fallen. Should not be.
Is there a question for that?
That's a question. Yeah.
Just paraphrase it.
Yeah, so that question was about potable water in Manithni and boil water advisories and how long they've been in place and how we might help. Everything that is done on behalf of Manithni needs to be done with Manithni leadership. And so I would not stand here and say precisely. The dynamic there is always nation to nation and is always federal. And that is a challenge when we don't have federal representatives in our community the way that we have provincial and municipal. I don't even know who the right person federally would be. But that would, like, my advice with everything Manithni would be to work with residents, work with members, citizens of the nations, and follow their lead.
Yes, sir.
I'm interested in affordable housing because I don't understand what the term means in this town. Bonus, density bonusing is one term that was referred to. And my understanding from what I've read in the paper is that that's a house that costs 10% less than market.
Right.
And I'm wondering if there's any restriction on that price after it's been sold.
So that was after an affordable, quote unquote, affordable unit is sold, are there restrictions on the future sales prices? Like, does it stay affordable? Is that the gist of it? Yeah, and I mean, that would vary. So that 10% from the area structure plans is mandated to be sold off to an affordable housing provider, which would keep it in a perpetually affordable state. The precise rules of that would vary depending on the provider and the building and everything else.
That's okay, we'll get Sean afterwards.
No, that's probably a good question. I think the short answer, is that it depends on what it's been designated to be and who's managing it. But often, you're right, that is often a problem.
Mayor Krausert,
Go
you've
ahead,
done a
Sean.
ton of work on this file. You have the floor, sir.
Yeah, I don't like using the terms affordable housing either because it's really hard to achieve affordable for all. I try to make it more income appropriate, or I just refer to it as non-market. When talking about density bonusing, Adam is exactly right. Those homes are then go under the, they become owned by either Canmore Community Housing or another housing provider, and they will stay in the system. There's two systems. One is a rental system, and that is owned by Canmore Community Housing or owned by the town of Canmore, and that quite literally it will stay intact because the ownership doesn't change. The 10% below market is actually the least below market. Most of Canmore Community Housing's rentals are more in the 30% below market. The ownership track is a little bit more trickier because you need to have a special mechanism on title. And essentially what happens is when you buy an affordable, like a Vital Homes, a non-market home, you are buying it at X price, and they're not typically 10% below. They're actually quite a bit below market because there's no profit built into the sale. You basically sell it for what you can build it for, and so the person buys it. It's a very significant buy. It could be 350,000. It could be 550,000. I don't know about you, but that's a big buy for me. And once that person buys it and they have their mortgage, they're owning it. There's an equation on title that dictates how your equity grows. So beyond paying down your mortgage, there's also a growth in the value of the property. It's just not growing at market. It might be the consumer price index, or it might be a certain set percentage per year. And then when they want to sell it, they have to sell it to somebody on the list who's qualified to buy that home through Canmore Community Housing. And then the new buyer buys it. If nobody on that list buys it, then one of two things happens. Either Canmore Community Housing or the town steps in to buy it in order to keep it in the non-market system, or after a certain amount of time, it can be sold onto the market. Of course, we don't want to see that happen.
Thanks very much, Mayor Krausert. I'm thinking that might well amply answer your question. That was very comprehensive from both of these gentlemen. Next question. Dr. Henderson. I'll stop calling you that, Tracy. Go ahead.
I'm curious, it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that the density bonusing historically has not really resulted in, that's been used up till now, has not resulted in the number of gains of, or a number of developers taking advantage of that. Or it hasn't lived up to what we hoped as far as outcome. Just curious as to why that is.
Mom, you know
And
why?
is there hope of changing the structure of it so we get more uptake by the developer?
Is that for both Adam and the mayor possibly?
Whoever feels.
So,
Yeah.
Adam, Mayor Krausert, care to respond? Mayor, Sean, did you hear that? Okay.
No, I didn't hear that at all. I needed
So,
paraphrase,
Okay,
please.
okay, then here we go.
so that Tracy was asking about the history of density bonusing and whether it's been effective at achieving the levels of affordable units that were sort of promised. Is that right?
Yeah.
Or
That we have hope. Yeah.
we're hoped, yeah. There's never a promise.
It's relatively new in Canmore. It hasn't been used a lot. It's a way of getting some housing. As I said in my intro, I'm no longer putting my hope or expectation that we're going to solve our problem by housing that is through the private sector. We need to do what we can ourselves. We just won't get enough at the rate and volume that we need it.
Yeah.
Anything to add, or are you good? Okay, great question, Tracy. Thank you. Any next question? We'll just see if the.
Yeah, no, for Javan.
Did you want Javan to respond to that?
No, I want Javan to respond to it.
Okay, yeah. So, thank you. Hold the phone for a sec. Go ahead, sir. Big voice, just that big voice, shout it out.
Is there any metric or algorithm or research that would predict what kind of population the valley could bear before the ecosystem was violated?
No, frankly. Sorry, the question was basically carrying capacity for the valley for human population. No, I mean, population always depends more on the consumption patterns of the people than it does on the raw number of them. I think like we have a really, really good understanding as far as this goes of how much space we need to leave to make sure that there's space for other critters. We're not meeting it with the current plans. In this case, that is of no fault to the municipality. But no, I mean, yeah, I think carrying capacity is a number that I think a lot of folks would love to get at, and I think it's impossible. I think it depends too much on the specifics. We just can't take up all the room. However we do it, we can't take up all the room. And then it becomes a question of the kind of life you want to have too. And I think that's a different conversation, right? Is how, excuse me, like how dense a community feels livable to you. And it's going to be different for different people. But no, there's a lot of research I would like to see done. Hi, nice donut. So,
The cutest person in the room is Adam's daughter, River, right?
that's my son.
Yeah, River, thank you. Yeah. The long hair, God,
Yeah.
gets me every time.
Yeah.
Great question, thank you for that. Great answer, very thoughtful answer, as not a big surprise here coming from Adam Linnar. Other questions? Other than a lot of smart people in this room, and I don't know, I think you've got it in you, yes, go ahead.
I think this is a question for Mayor Krausert. With regards to the affordability tax, the vacant homeowners tax has not been without controversy. Lots of letters. And it is being challenged by the developers. So I'm curious how the town feels about that court challenge, whether or not you feel you'll be successful and it will stand. You mentioned that the developers have said, do what you can within your lane, but it's developers who are also challenging that tax. So I'm curious about whether or not there is a future for this tax that we are, relying on to support some of these ongoing issues.
Yeah, so Sean, that one's for you too. That was about the court challenges to the vacant home tax. And what you think your chances are.
Well, let me put it this way. We wouldn't have gotten this far unless we thought we could do it. And we do believe that we have a strong case. That said, judicial reviews don't typically have a high bar to meet. And what will be ordered if that bar is not met, it remains to be seen whether the bylaw would just be thrown back to us and we'd have to change something or not. We're hopeful that it will be supported. That said, I'm not naive enough to think that there might be some wishing to change the rules to limit the municipality to do this. So that is also something that is always a possibility out there. I'm thinking in terms of if we are successful and there is no change, great. But if there is either of those, how do we move forward and not relying on that one thing? So I have a couple of other ideas that I won't go into right now. So I'm going to be very interested to see the outcome of the judicial review, which is set to be heard on April 15th, and hope that it goes our way. I'm not just going to throw in the towel if it doesn't go our way. We're going to keep on going. We have to. It's an existential threat to our community. It's as simple as that. We know the script of mountain destination communities, and it goes a lot to what Adam was talking about. Eventually, it becomes more and more second home ownership. People are coming from afar to service that community. It's nature and fabric of that community completely falls apart from what it is now, and it becomes something completely different. And so I'm treating it as an existential threat and going to be fighting for that accordingly.
And good on you for doing so, Mr. Mayor, thank you.
We have a question from Dr. Lauren Kepkevich in the back.
Dr. Lauren Kevich in the back. Okay, Dr. Lauren, you have the floor.
Hi, I just have a question for Javan. I was just wondering if you could speak to some of the issues that you see specific to housing with, and environment, with the communities that you work with, as well as some of the community organizing that I have seen happening at a grassroots level, with diverse communities to address issues of like housing and environment as well.
Paraphrase your way if you dare.
So Lauren was asking about, Javan was asking about your experiences organizing at a grassroots level for housing and environment.
Some of the particular issues with the communities that Javan works with and some of the organizing of
Right. And some of the specific issues around housing that you organized around for the communities that you're part of.
Thanks, Javan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the question. Some of the work that I've been involved through the organizations that I work with was organizing information sessions and workshops to learn more about the available resources and what's available in terms of housing to immigrants in the community. So the challenges that we've seen, especially myself as an immigrant, as also part of my work, is the lack of communication and the barriers such as language. And also of course the representation of immigrants in the boards. Say Canmore Community Housing has a board, but I believe there's no representation of immigrants and persons of color. So these are some of the challenges that we're seeing, that there's the voices of immigrants are not necessarily being heard. Not that these people in power, they don't necessarily want to hear, but they're not necessarily being effectively communicated due to the barriers that I spoke about. So our job has been, and my job when working with immigrants has been to make sure that immigrants are connected to these resources and their voices are heard through different channels. That's been, we've worked closely with the community Canmore Housing in the past to organize few information sessions to explain thoroughly what the community Canmore Community Housing Corporation is and what they're doing as an organization and how they can help immigrants to achieve some of the goals that they have so that they can always place home. That's been main work that I've been involved with. Outside of that, I really want to stress something that is about advocacy for immigrants, that I really would like to see more advocacy for immigrants. And I hear this a lot in the community from folks that, well, if you want, you can get involved and you can have your voice heard. And my answer has always been that, not everyone has that opportunity, and that's why we need to have equity. People have language barriers, people have also the time commitments. A lot of immigrants work in hospitality jobs that have 2-3 jobs. They don't necessarily have the time to attend some of these sessions. I want to ask a question: how many persons of color you see in this event right now? And also, a language is a big piece. We used to have a link class, language instruction for newcomers to the federal government. It was provided for free, and due to the reducing the immigration levels through public policy that we had recently, that program has been cut, and that's not being offered not only in person but also online. So that limits the ability of immigrants to improve their English language skills, so that will help them with their social being and just in general survive in the community. So to make living. So I think there are some of these unique challenges that needs to be really considered. And I do, I do encourage our politicians, people in power to work closely with immigrants and to identify these issues and problems and hopefully find some solution. So, and I'm more than happy to contribute as much as I can. I care a lot about this community, and I care a lot about the issues that we have, and I want to be part of that discussion so that I can contribute as an immigrant and as part of my culture.
Can what?
Javan, your voice is a very important one in this conversation, and I'm grateful to my colleague Tanya for consistently reminding me of the need to involve a round of sugar for all my friends. To involve equity deserving members of our, and then coming up with an honorarium perhaps to ensure that there's not a financial barrier to their involvement. And then perhaps working on other elements, the language and so on, simplifying the language that we use and the communication, etc. There's a bit of a playbook that I'm grateful to you for introducing. Javan, you're still on the hook. We'll squeeze in one more question, Ariel, if you can make it real fast and nice and loud. Go ahead.
I live on Durgis Lane amidst a high proportion of lovely immigrant people, and it's a great pleasure to live in that community. My question to you is, you've partially answered it, but and Gareth is partially responsible to it also. How can we ensure that when we have community gatherings, we are not predominantly white folk?
Javan, did you catch that, or do you need a paraphrase?
So I couldn't hear the last part. If you could repeat that, please.
Basically strategies for ensuring that it's not all just white people.
In the average community meeting.
In a community meeting, in a community gathering, there's that everyone feels like they can be there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work being done, and I'm grateful for that. We have organizations such as Affordability Immigration Partnership. We settlement services through the town of Banff, and we have caring community members like Adam. Adam reached out to me a few months ago and to talk about this issue, especially that we're here today, and to learn learn a little bit about my thoughts, and I'm grateful for that. I think it is I think this goes in all directions, in all ways. If you want to understand the challenges and issues and needs of the people, regardless of their background and race, put yourself into their shoes and see how would you like to be treated and how would you like to be connected and talked about some of the issues that you're facing. So what would be the best way for people to reach out to you and include you in these discussions? And so I think in community level, what can be done as a key community member is when you have a neighbor, chat with them, talk to them, learn about their issues, see what's happening in their lives. And when you see an opportunity, ask them to see if they would like to be part of it. And more of an organizational level, it could be that they could be done some surveys with immigrants to learn more about their, challenges and see how these challenges can be addressed. And, we have these organizations, as I mentioned, Global Immigration Partnership they have done some assessments and some surveys to learn about the needs of immigrants. And now they're working with different organizations and businesses to implement some solutions, which is, I think there has been some, you can see some signs about that. Invite them as much as you can, but also, to these events and activities, but also keep in mind that if a person says no, they can't come, but that's not because they don't care. It could be because there are different barriers such as language and the time. Considering that, I want to say that don't be discouraged. Today, I was able to attend here because I have two jobs. I have to ask my other job to give me a day off so that I can attend and come this event, which I'm thankful to my workplace. And I understand not many people will have that same opportunity to be able to ask, and also not many people will have the same privilege like myself, have enough language skills to be able to connect with you folks and discuss some of the issues we have. So yeah, I think just in general, keep them in your mind and invite them as much as possible, but also knowing that there are barriers that could prevent them from participating.
Hey, Javan, that was extremely well articulated, and I'm personally very grateful to you for taking the time to attend, despite your health challenges. Ditto for you, Mayor Krausert. Thanks so very much. Adam, this has been an extraordinary evening. And folks, some great questions to all of you. So join me, won't you, in thanking our panelists. Have a private chat, and we've got to clear the people go home. Grab a snack in the road.